There are two things that I'm not really good at in music production. Actually, there are a bunch of things I'm not really good at in music production, but two in particular are synthesis and sound design. So, when I got a message from ROLI asking, hey, want to do a video about synthesis and sound design? I was like, But then they said, you can use Chat GPT. Now, I have no idea if this is going to work, what Chat GPT is even capable of in terms of designing for a specific synth, but we're going to find that out today. Let's grab the Seaboard RISE 2 and try it out. Alright, to kick this off, let's see if this is something that Chat GPT is even interested in doing or capable of doing. I like to be kind to the robots, you know, for when that big AI revolution and they start coming for the humans. I was a nice human, AI. I was a nice human. Hey, GPT, I'd like to design some sounds in Equator 2 today. Okay, what kind of sound are you looking to create? Let's do something I think would be relatively easy. I'd like to create a pad sound similar to the dreamy atmospheric sounds of the Blade Runner by Vangelis. Let's see if this is actually going to help us achieve this sound. All right, step 1. Choose a waveform that's rich in harmonics such as sawtooth or a waveform with some pulse width modulation. Here we have Equator 2. Let's jump up and choose a sawtooth. Detune multiple oscillators slightly to add thickness. Let's turn on a second layer and let's do a sawtooth again. And like ChatGPT said, let's do a fine detune. And maybe we'll pan this one. Make it a little wider. Actually, let's mix it up a little bit and let's choose a sine wave for this one. And then we're going against the directions. I wonder how much it wants me to detune these. We're getting some width anyway. Okay, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Filter configuration. Use a low pass filter to smooth out the high frequencies, create a warm sound. Let's turn on the low pass filter here. And you know, that's already kind of at about 70 or 80%. Envelopes. Set the amplitude envelope with a slow attack, 1.5 seconds, to let the sound gradually swell in. Let's bring the attack up to 1.5 seconds, like it said. Nice slow attack. That's pretty smooth. And then if we just turn up that release time, two seconds? Maybe that's too long, but we'll see later. LFO modulation. Assign a low frequency oscillator, LFO, to modulate the filter cutoff or oscillator pitch slightly. Okay, so to assign an LFO in Equator 2, you basically just have to go to the LFO, so it's highlighted here. And you know, let's adjust the fine tuning of the first oscillator. So we can do that with the outer ring. If I raise that or lower that, you can see that outer ring is orange, which is corresponding to the LFO that we're on. I can go up or down. I'm gonna say let's go up and let's not make this too aggressive. If I play this now, it's sort of quickly moving that fine tune, but I wanted to do it more slowly. So let's turn the frequency down. And let's assign a second LFO, same vibes, but let's do this second oscillator here. Let's have that detune it down. I don't know if this is going to be too dissonant. It's close. Effects. Add a touch of reverb to enhance the atmospheric quality of the pad. Well, that makes sense. You go over to the Effects tab. On this empty slot, let's add a big reverb as it suggested. And decay time's at 70%, so I assume that's pretty long. Let's hear that. Let's add more dry wet. Make this room size bigger. Okay, add a little bit of reverb to it and suddenly we're getting more and more Blade Runner-y. I'm gonna make that super wide too. All right, next step. Consider adding a subtle chorus or ensemble effect to widen the stereo field. Let's do that on FX2. Let's see how this sounds. I'm gonna crank that wet up so I can really hear what's happening here. Okay, that's actually pretty cool. All right, next step, evolving textures. To achieve the evolving nature of Blade Runner pads, consider using the modulation options in Equator 2. I think that's a good idea, and let's actually utilize MPE to do that. Let's use pressure to open up the filter. Now that it's highlighted, the outer ring of the filter cutoff, let's bring that up. Let's make it more extreme so it's even more audible. That filter is going to go up as I apply more pressure. Great. One thing I noticed about the sound with the effects is I actually have the effects mixing. So we're losing a little bit of that reverb space with the chorus coming after it. Let's just switch that to parallel. Now we'll have that big reverby space. With the chorus as well. Okay, you know, that is sounding pretty Blade Runner-y. Tweaking, spend time experimenting with different parameters. Well, a little bit of experimentation that I would love to do would be to add one more layer, like another synth layer maybe, probably another sawtooth layer. And what I want to do is have a really bassy low octave that I can bring in at certain times. Here's how I want to do that. On the wavetable, sawtooth, let's bring the chorus down. So now we have a full-on lower octave. If I bring that down to 24, you're gonna hear that really deep bass sound. Now, what if we assigned that to slide? Selecting slide here, adjusting this ring. Now, essentially, so when I slide up a note now, it should slowly introduce a 2 octaves lower bass note. I think that's pretty cool. Ooh, spooky little glide there at the end. This, I don't know, I think this is sounding pretty good, pretty Blade Runner-y. But Chat GPT has a very important last step. Step 10, save and refine. Very good reminder, Chat GPT, thank you. Remember, we want to be as gracious to the robots as possible for, you know, the AI revolution that is quickly coming. So I will say thank you so much, GPT. Glad I could help. Thank you for the credit. I appreciate it. Wow, so appreciative. Enjoy creating dreamy atmospheric pad sounds and have a great time making music. I will, GPT. Thank you. So next, I actually asked on my Instagram for you all to give me some descriptions of some sounds that I could design. Some were literal, some were a little bit abstract. There were multiple fart references. But let's start to pull from that list. This first one could be interesting. TJ Music HK says, dreamy kalimba, huge and super wide. Let's design a new sound. How can I make a dreamy kalimba? Can be a lot of fun, says GPT. Okay, here we go. All right, let's open a new patch. Of course, that's going to be our first step. MPE. Oscillators. Use a simple sine wave as the base oscillator. Let's choose sine wave. Duplicate the oscillator and detune the duplicate slightly, a few cents or so. This will add some thickness to the sound. All right, so we're just setting up another, and we're detuning it slightly by a few cents. So let's hear before and after. All right, that's fine. It is a little thicker. Pitch modulation. Assign a slow LFO to modulate the pitch of both oscillators. I assume it shouldn't be too extreme. So let's go to LFO 1 and let's assign that, I'm assuming, to the fine tuning. I guess I'm going to do these on separate LFOs if that makes any sense. We'll do a slow one here. So slow. And then let's go to LFO 2 and let's basically do the same exact thing. Slow. Filter configuration, apply a low pass filter with a moderate cutoff to tame any harsh high frequencies. Got it. GPT loves warmth and low pass filters. I think we'll get along just fine. Envelopes. We need a slow attack to let the sound fade in gradually, mimicking the kalimba's plucked nature. Isn't a plucked nature like a fast attack? I gotta call out GPT on this. You say to use a slow attack or a plucked sound. But I thought plucked sounds were having a fast attack. You're absolutely right, and I apologize for any confusion. Pluck sounds do indeed have a fast attack to simulate the initial transient of a plucking. Okay, moderate decay. I guess that's fine. Longer release. I gotta say, these LFOs, I think I'm out on the LFOs for at least one of these layers. I don't think they both need to have this crazy pitch modulation happening. I also noticed there's a trigger option on the LFO. So every time I play a note, it's kind of restarting the wave. But now since we're going so slow, let's turn trigger off. That way it's kind of always running. And wherever I add a note, oh, that's kind of interesting. It's like not giving a realistic kalimba sound, but the way it's moving slowly means that the sound keeps changing like that throughout. All right, stereo widening. It says to use a widener like a chorus or something in the effects. Let's just use a basic chorus. You can turn down the depth. We'll crank up that stereo width. Reverb, a generous amount of reverb with a long decay time. Of course. Big reverb. Obviously crank up that decay, crank up the dry wet, room size. Duplicate the patch and slightly adjust the parameters of the duplicate to create a layered effect. I hear you, but I don't want to do too many layers. It's already sounding like pretty thick. I want to experiment with adding is maybe just one more sine wave, but that's kind of in the background and maybe one octave up. So something that's not too high. One thing I noticed is like when you're playing a kalimba, it's got that clicky sound because you're flicking those tines on the kalimba. I want to see if we can do a sampler layer. So let me open up Splice really quick and see if I can find just a click sound. Maybe I have something in my library already. Let's do that one at first, because I wonder if that paired with the tone will give the illusion that we are plucking the note on a kalimba. I don't want the pitch of that click to change every time, so I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. And I don't want it affected by like glide. I don't want to change the pitch of this click at all. Let me boost that 12 dB. Oh. Yeah, that second sample on another layer. Let's see if we can find a little bit of a better sample for that. I wonder if that will work. Let's try it. And for a really quick experiment, let me turn off the reverb. And just to add a little bit of modulation, let's fine tune these clicks a little bit so that they're not exactly the same every single time. Having one pan left, one pan right is fine. We'll make that a much slower LFO. And let's throw our reverb back on. And I do want to point out that TJ did say super wide. So let's go all out and just crank that width on the reverb. Maybe we add a little bit of a delay, some simple delay. And if I look at routing, I can actually bring in more of the dry signal of one of these. And the more I listen to it, the more I want to lift up that cutoff. Massive and bright, that's aligned with the description we got. All right, so just after a little tweaking, have a little fun, I actually made the third oscillator be 2 octaves above, and I had it react to strike, which is, you know, how hard I'm going to strike a note. So that higher note is going to come out more the harder I strike. I also gave strike to the cutoff of the filter. So if I strike really hard, more brighter frequencies will come out. I feel like that's actually how a kalimba operates. What better way to test a dreamy sound than A whole tone scale. Sounds pretty dreamy to me. Thank you, TJ, for the suggestion. So I did ask folks on Instagram to be a little bit abstract, and I got kind of this really interesting abstract sound idea here from Pedro. It says, a floating sugar cotton inside a glass cathedral. I have no idea what that means. I don't know if Chat GPT will know what that means, but we're gonna try it. I'm ready to make a new sound. A floating sugar cotton inside a glass cathedral. Let's see, I have no idea what it's going to come up with. Let's break down the description and translate it to a sound design approach that captures the essence of this unique idea. Floating, the term floating suggests weightlessness, gentle movement. Sugar cotton implies something soft, fluffy, and delicate. Glass cathedral evokes an image of grandeur, transparency, and reverberation. The sound should have a spacious, ethereal quality as if it's resonating within a vast, echoing space. That AI revolution, folks, it's coming faster than we know. All right, let's start making the sound. Texture and tone. Use a soft and harmonically rich waveform, such as a gentle sine or a soft square wave. I'm down with all of that. Let's start with sine. I'm not sure if we should do both. It didn't say yet to add multiple layers, so let's start with sine because sine is like the most delicate. Next, let's add a noise layer. I guess white noise is fine, but pink noise feels softer. Let's make that wide. Employ a slow attack and release to create a gradual onset and gentle decay. Slow attack, slow release. I'm down with that. Apply a low pass filter to soften the edges of the sound. It's killing it on describing why it's making its choices. It's actually like a little scary. So let's enable filter 1 once again. Don't want it to be too high, but let's go ahead and assign LFO 1 to the filter cutoff. Let's let it open up. Obviously we want floating. You know, I just noticed this density knob here on the noise. And I kind of like that. That has a floaty quality to it too, like just that variation. Let's assign that to an LFO as well. Slow, of course. I know we're going to be adding reverb at some point. Oh, look, next step. Step 5, reverb in space. Interesting. I don't know what it's thinking about a sense of glass. To me, that implies like higher frequencies coming through. Okay, I'm kind of getting where we're going with this. Consider adding a very subtle chorus or ensemble effect. We can try that again. Some chorus. I'm going to crank that depth. Hear what's happening. A little more width. Crank the dry wet. Oh. Layering and detuning. Duplicate the patch and detune the duplicate slightly. This adds a touch of richness and depth to the sound. Why don't we just do that then? Let's add another sine wave. Slight detune. I mean, we've already got the chorus going, so we've got a detuned aspect to it. Here's something interesting. There is a granular synth in here. And there's a selection of samples for the granular synth. So let's try Foley. Oh, that is something interesting. To me, a glass cathedral, I think that's coming through with this sound. I'm wondering about putting that granular up an octave so it's super bright. That's a little too demonic in my opinion. Let's bring that back down. I think it's fine right where it is. It doesn't need to be super loud. And if it's floating, things are like moving around us, why don't we modulate the panning on another LFO? I'm always going for a slow LFO, I'm finding. So now those are just sort of, that granular layer is moving around us. Now, what we haven't done yet with one of these sounds, we're making our own patches. We might as well make our own macros, which makes the whole thing easier to control anyway. We have the option of looking at the macros like this, like individual knobs, or like this layout, which aligns with our setup right here on the Seaboard RISE 2. All right, so I've gone through and tweaked the sound to make it sound even more like a floating sugar cotton inside a glass cathedral. Here's what I did. First, I added a second granular layer in addition to the Foley, but this granular layer is pitched up an octave and comes in as I slide my finger up the keyboard. That makes a nice shimmery sound. Taking more advantage of the MPE, I pretty much always love to map pressure to the filter cutoff, so as I play a chord and apply pressure and release pressure, the filter cutoff will go up and down. One gesture I actually don't take a lot of advantage of is lift, and it's because it can be a little bit difficult sometimes to trigger, but if I play a note and aggressively release it, that's called lift in ROLI's MPE world. And if you heard when I did that, I've got that crackly sound drifting away, and I think that's really cool. That reminds me of something floating through the air and flying away. And with that, I added another noise layer, this time white noise, and the level of that noise is connected to the lift. So if you watch a level, as I lift, you'll see. And the more aggressively I do that, the more we get that crackling sound. And it's something that's also easy to avoid, because if I just gently release notes, we're not going to get that. But if I want to have one note react like that, I can, and it drifts off into the air. Now with these patches, we haven't been assigning macros, but we can do that really easily. The same basic way we've been assigning like LFOs too. You click on the macro you want to map, which by the way, I have it in the view where it matches up with my Seaboard RISE 2, so I can use these faders and this XY pad. You can also look at it just in its encoder form. But the first one is simple. I've just mapped it to reverb dry wet. That's completely dry. And bring in a lot of reverb. That's always good to have. 2, I'm experimenting with having the release time actually mapped here, just so I can quickly adjust that if I so choose. Now the XY pad, I added an additional effect into the chain, a grain delay, and I think it sounds really good. Check this out. Oh, we got that little glide. And that's just mapping 2 parameters to the X and Y axis. And what I've mapped there is the density and the feedback of the grain delay. I think it fits well with the sound. You know, this one was the most abstract, and I gotta thank Pedro once again for the suggestion. And I also gotta shout out Chat GPT. Like, all that little extra stuff that I did, Chat GPT didn't come up with, but it did actually set us on the right path and gave some pretty interesting descriptions of like why it chose all these different sound design choices. I'm pleasantly surprised, and this is my favorite sound that we've designed so far today. Alright, so what did you think of that process? I was pleasantly surprised. It's clear that there is limits to Chat GPT and sound design, but for me, somebody who's not really super familiar with designing my own sounds in a synth like Equator 2, it kind of gave me the first steps in designing a sound, and then I could use my own, musical judgment and the limited knowledge I have of synthesis to know whether it was, actually correct, or whether it was going to actually help me achieve the sound that I've described. And that last preset was actually great. I've started using it in a track I'm working on already. So thank you to everybody who submitted cool ideas. If that's something we're interested in doing in the future as a community, I would love to do that. Let me know what you thought about the sound in the comments down below. And I do have a link in the description for 10% off Equator 2 or anything on ROLI's shop. Use the code TAETRO10 to take advantage of that. And thank you again to ROLI for sponsoring this video. Shout out to all the members. That is going to be it for now. Thank you all so much for watching. This has been TAETRO. Have a good one.